Before I open the floor for questions, Dr. Abla has a number of remarks to make. First, for those who want to pose questions, kindly write them down and write your names down in an orderly fashion. To cover the issue that is really impressive, I did not know that the data is well and alive. On the definition of big data, it is scattered. Data is scattered across Google and Facebook and so on and so forth. And for that, and because of that, there was a need to aggregate them. It is a situation that was imposed upon us because of the digital technologies. What does not matter, rather the how. As much as the how this data is turned into information that could be used in business. One of the very strong statements that summarizes it all, that we're moving from the market-oriented approaches to the customer-oriented approach. And as such, the product, regardless of regardless of the product itself, I can build the strategies, and we have seen the applications with the CIB, and they also have it on the credit card. They can add the mileage every time I can make a purchase. I can add to the mileage. It's very also interesting, the difference between the information technology and the mobile sector, because the mobile sector is already born digital, but the banking sector is not, and that's why they have a lot of room for improvement and transformation. You have talked extensively to provide benefit and value for others while maintaining the confidentiality of the information. The purchases are being reported and they include the information, but no confidentiality is being breached. And also you have talked about the one-to-one marketing and the very crucial information that people use the internet. People are more online during winter times and they use their mobile phones less during cold times. And that there is a hygiene of data. There are very strange words that were being thrown out. There is a data, what is called data hygiene, the data link, and a lot of very pompous words that gives me the impression that the data is someone with flesh and blood. I have 2 points that you have to keep in mind. The legal aspect, or the meaning that the big data and the big data analytics are a tool for performance improvement. The question is, what should I do legally in order to empower this? The Constitution includes terms on the free flow of information, particularly that we're talking about blockchain, not only data. So what do we need, legally speaking, in place in order to be able to usher into this era? And we started the blockchain. Blockchain is very recent, and for once in our times, we are not running late. We have been able to introduce the blockchain technology, and even users can vouch for that.
And you can benefit from that beyond the business. Any business can benefit from that very intelligently and very simply at the same time. This is clear and simple. The question is, how can the state benefit and how can it be able to plan the economic projects better, and how can it set better budgets and divide the services in a better way so that I pay attention to the man, which is the pivot of development and the pivot of everything. If the information about the person or the man is available, it will inform the planning process and it will maximize the use of resources for a state. These are the 2 points I wanted to make. From my point of view, because I'm very interested in financial services, from big data analysis and or analytics, I'd like to see a product come from that. The score system, also at the level of the individual. If we're talking about micro enterprises and we're talking also about the digital economy and about going directly to the consumer and pitching my financial services to them. If I don't know their credit condition and their financial condition, and if I do not score that consumer, I will not be able to do anything. So the bank must know everything. Abroad, people get funding from banks to buy cars while they are in the exhibitions of cars. Or, if there is a company that funds the car for that person because they can find the credit score for that person, and this would enable that person to buy a car for a value of $50,000 or whatever. So why don't we have a scoring system at the level of the individual? This will reshape our entire economy. Microphone. We will open the door for questions, and please write down the points that you'd like to make. Mr. Fadi Labib. Thank you for ECES. I have 2 questions. The first question is to Mr. Islam with regard to the governor of the central bank had announced a study for establishing the first digital bank in Egypt. I'd like to know the role of big data in that regard and how it will affect this endeavor. Also, the second question to Mr. Ala. Recently, we've heard about synonyms of big data like the Internet of Things or the cloud computing. So are these concepts starting to overlap or interlink with big data, or are these future stages? So let's take question by question. With regard to the role of data in the world of digital banks as a whole, when it comes to digital and digitization, we exchange the flow of data. We do not exchange funds. So the data will have an important role in facilitation of payment systems and exchange, and for a better understanding of this type of customers. When the governor of the central bank or the Ministry of Finance or the government in general announces that we would like to include some people financially, so we need to create an ecosystem that can accommodate this type of people. The people who are in the banking sector have some deposits, and they start some taking loans from their deposits. So the current customers have a positive cash flow. They have money that they borrow or that they lend to other people. The financially excluded clients are people who transact. They do not have high savings. So we'd like to encourage their savings, and we would like to have a different type of lending activities. Mr. Hussein was saying that if I want to buy some gas for my car, I have to get some 200 pounds on the spot. I have some money for a workshop, so I sometimes need money on the spot. So this needs to the needs for the person to be scored and to have a good track record that is well known. And here the data sciences come into play. I need to understand the client and to understand their profile well. The question, there was a second part of that question. The the question about IoT and cloud, these are technologies that you can say are connected to big data or linked to big data because first I will talk first about IoT because these are two different things. IoT is the Internet of Things, and the idea of the Internet of Things is that, for example, the world population. How many people is the world population? 7 billion people. We have 7 billion people, and how many of those 7 billion have mobile phones? You're talking about 6 billion people. Uh, so there is a conviction that we have reached the stage of saturation, and the people who are capable of having cell phones do have cell phones. The next step in the world of communication is that this cell phone or SIM card would not be owned by a person but by a machine. IoT was previously called machine-to-machine communication, and then it was expanded and called the Internet of Things. I will give you some real-life examples. For example, if we have a car that has a SIM card inside of it, then it has a process of communication, and it notifies about the malfunctions that are in it, and also it notifies about how the kilometers the covered, and they send these data are sent to a service center, and this is the idea of IoT, to have a SIM card in the car, in the washing machine, in the light switch. So all these devices and appliances start to communicate. Do you imagine? We were talking about that the data of Ala, for example, can generate megabytes, gigabytes, and terabytes of data. And imagine now the number of devices and appliances in the world. So this will surpass that amount of data. We're talking about 10 billion connections or Internet of Things connections over the next couple of years. So this will create an explosion of data. This problem of the volume of data will actually exacerbate, and there is a close connection between these two technologies, the Internet of Things and big data. Also, the other concept that you mentioned, the cloud. When I presented the slide about the distributed architecture, this per se is cloud. The Hadoop system, the big data technology, is predicated on having distributor systems. These are not machines that are in the same place, but different machines scattered in different places. This is what's called the cloud technology. So there's a very close connection. You can log on Amazon, and if you'd like to run a certain model, you will find a huge amount of data, and it will use lots of RAM size. If you are a data scientist and you'd like to try something, you will not buy a machine that has this kind of astronomical features to run an experiment, but the cloud will allow you to do that. You can log onto Amazon online, and you can ask for a certain amount of giga RAM, and you will need a certain amount of data for the next couple of hours or on that day. If you use that, then and you finished your use of that, you can just stop, and that's what cloud is. We will take all the questions, all the remainder of the questions together. Mrs. Farah Al-Batrawi. I had a small question. I don't know. how you can respond to it, but how can governments rely on big data for taking more effective economic decisions? And are there experiences of governments in that regard? I think Obama did something like that. Can you clarify? Mr. Sharif from the Research and Innovation Department. I'm from Bank Misr. I'd like to ask about the tools used in the optimization or the intelligent analysis in order to allow me to make better decisions. Mr. Mahmoud, our engineer, Mahmoud Galal, from the Ministry of Planning. Mahmoud Galal from the Ministry of Planning. First, I'd like to thank you for this important panel discussion. My question revolves around the fact that governments often do not know the type of data that can benefit them and that can be available for the big data companies. There was an example that was offered for us that about the ability to trace the traffic movement daily so that the government can have the patterns of the traffic in the morning and the different times of the day. For example, we can know the flow of traffic from October 6th to another region of Cairo. So as a government, the government can have a pattern for the traffic on a daily basis based on which it can identify the roads and the routes that need improvements and that need more parking spots, and they can study the traffic picture in their capital as a whole. Unfortunately, the government is not usually in close contact with the companies that have this big data, and the companies also do not know what the government can benefit from. So I'd like to ask if there are experiences like in Vodafone, between Vodafone and the government on that regard, and how can the government benefit from these experiences? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Engineer Khalid Adib. First, I'd like to thank you very much for this rich discussion. I have some comments. First, I'd like to. I am head of the big data team. I am Egypt's representative in the UN on that regard. So, and I'd like to say that what you're talking about is very beautiful. In Egypt Vision 2030, or based on it, no one is working alone. And I hope that we can have better cooperation. We have 5 projects on the use of big data in CapMass. We have a 3-sided triangle. The first is the source of big data. The second side is the sustainable development indicators, and the third side is formal statistics. In order to use a certain source of big data, the CapMass, or the Central Agency for Public Mobilization and Statistics, need to connect this to social media. Social media, for me, I do not have formal statistics about social media. The Netherlands and the advanced countries was able to use data from social media and to know how many people are sad, how many people are happy, and so on and so forth. Also, if you'd like to have a data warehouse or a database might not allow me to use big data, but through the micro strategy, I can have something called the data mining. What does that mean? I analyze the behavior of people working or the target groups, and when can I say that I'm using big data? I have a number of data warehouses through which I can use big data, and I can use the Hadoop as a tool, as a developer, and I can start working on that. What I'm interested in the end of my comment, I'd like to say that Egypt has 5 projects, and the Egypt project has reverberated or has resonated in the UN, and what is important is to have cooperation For example, we have the Cancer Link project that is under the logo "A Better Life Without Cancer." The same idea is happens or has been applied in the U.S. And we try to identify the amount of healthcare provided to patients, and also what did Vodafone use so that we can identify how much contribution to the sustainable development indicators has been provided by Vodafone. So I hope that we can have better coordination and we can say that Egypt did this and that. Thank you. Dr. Nadia Al-Shinnawi. I'd like at the outset to thank you and to thank you all for this kind invitation and also for selecting the two sectors that are very important in the Egyptian society, the banking sector and the telecom sector. In fact, I agree with all that has been said by previous speakers about big data and its importance and it's the realities of it in the world. The use of big data and the analysis of big data and how to benefit from big data. Egypt has started working on that, and you might have followed recently in the past 2 or 3 weeks that the Minister of Communications was presenting the plan of the communication sector for the coming 8 years. Amongst the lines of business that the Ministry of Communications and Egypt will depend on is to expand on big data and benefiting from it, and also to encourage data centers, be them national or international companies, to work on that field in Egypt, because Egypt can benefit from that sector magnanimously in the field of investments and in the Egyptian decision-making process in different fields in Egypt. Also important in big data field is the discussion about the databases and the resorting to the programmers and the system analysts that we relied on and that did the processing in order to provide the economists with the outputs. The big data actually introduced a shift, a paradigm shift. The statisticians also are being trained on the trends of the market, on the use of data and the analysis of data, and also to extract results and to provide a dashboard for the decision makers in a timely manner in order to support decision-making process. Also, the thing that people need to know about big data is that for big data to work, it must be based on cloud computing, which depends on a huge amount of data, as the previous speaker said. I will mention an example. Someone was asking about the difference between IoT and cloud. If you take an example from the health sector, if there is a diabetic or heart patient can benefit from IoT in order to measure the heart rate or to the diabetes or the sugar in the blood. Also the movement of data that allow for quick intervention. In order for that to happen, this needs cloud computing. It can't work on small servers like in the past. Also, the Ministry of Communications has done lots of work over the past 2 years on cloud computing in order to rationalize the use of big data. Previously, each ministry had its own budget and looked for its servers, but now the ministry has helped rationalize and introduced a government cloud computing in order to manage the government data, and also there is cooperation with the private sector in order to make this available for the different other sectors. I'd like also to say something important. Big data will not be an alternative for the conventional data, but it will complement it. it will complement the data that is conventionally collected, but its speed or velocity and also its value and its different structure can integrate with the conventional data, and we can actually identify and measure trends, and we can measure a citizen's perception of a certain issue or a certain person in order to help speedy decision making. The last intervention by Mrs. Noor Al-Zini. Good morning. I'd like to thank you so much for this important session. You always keep us updated about everything new. I must be biased for women. I apologize. Thank you also so much. My question is to Mr. Ala Zahir. You talked about the outdoor. I'm a head of communication. I teach marketing at the AUC, the American University in Egypt and Cairo. Also, the question about outdoor is important for me. The agency usually wants to sell to you services through the outdoor people, and they do not provide you with real traffic. They do not give you enough quality. So, will this data be available for agencies or for and how do you measure the traffic? As you were saying, it's not only about the traffic, but it is also about the quality. Dr. Islam, you provided a very impressive presentation about an important issue, and I can see the value of it, especially with regard to marketing and how to reach the customer you want and how can you employ the marketing budget that you have based on the customer that you have. But you said, for example, that your team is consists of about 70 people. I know that my question is hard, but how, if we have CRM and other software in the bank, how can we integrate this software with the current staff in a way that is more cost effective? Because if I go to the management, I go and tell them that I have lots of benefits. The first question is how will you benefit from them? So first, my eyes are set on how to benefit from big data and how to reach your customers. Vodafone, what Vodafone said implies that it is a trend now. And now we have individual customization, especially with the change of demographic and the increase of the category of young people that need the tailored services. So I'd like to thank you so much. So you're asking him for the recipe. I asked him a difficult question. I acknowledge that it is a difficult one. We will move to the comments, but I'd like to say 2 points quickly. The central auditing agency and organization, in my viewpoint, is the most important governmental agency. And there is lots of great work that has been done there, and it is the source of information. So please cooperate, and hopefully the CIB can cooperate, but this necessitates that you do not only talk about the formal statistics and these things. The social media is a reality that needs to be benefited from in order to help the decision makers. The same goes for the Ministry of Communications. Lots of efforts are being exerted. The databases, we'd like to have in them the security, especially that they took lots of time, actually a decade or more than 1 decade in order to reach them. And we'd like also to reach to make them commensurate with the new technologies. We are ready now to host anything that allows cooperation between the Ministry of Communication and the Central Auditing Organization in order to reach a good formula. Pardon me. CAPMAS. I mean CAPMAS, not the Central Auditing Organization. I've been saying Central Auditing Organization instead of CAPMAS, the Central Agency for Public Mobilization and Statistics. So we can start with which question? The first question that was asked needs some clarification, the legality and the privacy. This is very important because handling data for us and the field of communication is governed by the communications law that necessitates that we operators not share the data of the personal data. So all what I presented today included no sharing of personal information. We were talking about trends of markets, not personal information. So we're talking about insights that we were able to extract from the data that we have. What we share with businesses is information about their markets. So this is a point that needs to be clear. The second question is about the scoring system. I'll repeat the question for you. I know that iScore does this. I might have missed something in that part. At the level of individuals, iScore does that. The scoring of financially excluded people. If someone does not have a bank account, so I will not have information that would allow me to know where that man borrows. My information might indicate that they are borrowing from my network or from me. They might be borrowing on credit through lend me credit thank you services. They might get some make a call on credit and then they repay the credit, and whoever does not repay the credit they are barred from having any more credit. So I think it needs a source of data that I do not think we have. Commenting on the part about the legal part, because the legal aspect is important. I think the Egyptian laws include protection of individuals. And Dr. Abla was saying that the Constitution enshrines this protection. I think the legislations and the laws that we have focus on the mechanisms, how to create open data centers, how can we allow to have open source platforms that can be used for credit scoring and so on and so forth. We saw that the central bank lately has been issuing instructions about access points and the use of different types of codes in order to guarantee the data safety. I think that it is well covered in the Egyptian legislations, but the legislations about the different technologies and mechanisms is that we need to work on in order to use the capacities in the data centers. I think that most the countries and companies in Egypt have data centers, but they are not well utilized. So how can we use this excess capacity together? If we are 40 banks in Egypt, how can we build our own data center, and how can we share this data to collectively together? This is the important part. Why is it important? Because when we talk about the financial inclusion today and how to provide transactional services, we find that the service cost is 20 or 30 pounds. This is what we call marginal business. So the cost of service is 1 cent or 2 cents. In order to provide the service at a cost of 1 or 2 cents, the overhead needs to go down considerably, and we need to create the platform strategy that is suitable for that, to avail platforms and to which all people have access. That's why success stories in Singapore or India and all of these models, the government played an important role in making or creating the platform like Digital India. I don't remember the platform in Singapore, in order to make in order to provide improve services. Also, there were some questions about the experiences of governments and the use of data. There were lots of experiences. And by the way, big data is not about social media only. That's why I was very conservative about saying that it is data, just like any type of data. And the size of it is something that concerns mathematicians. But at the end of the day, it is data. The uses by the government. If I want to have a customer service organization, I need as a government to have a people-centric organization or government. So I need to provide better understanding for the people I serve. They expect to receive services at certain qualities from the different governmental ports. I need to communicate with them about the problems that they might encounter. Also, it is important to use the analyses that come from the governmental databases. And I believe that the most important projects in the government now is the project for unification of databases. I think it is one of the most important national projects. I might be biased, but I don't mind being biased here. But it is important project because it will lead to to us having better understanding of the citizens and how to manage data that is by design limited, or resources that are limited. Also, we are now having an annual budget for the state or 5-year budget for the state. Why not, given the dynamics that we have, to have a dynamic budgeting process and to redistribute the limited resources whenever something new comes up, and also to be, you were just talking about SDGs and the Sustainable Development Indicators and the KPIs of the government's performance management, and the performance measurement is very important. On the strategy map of the government of Egypt, I will be able to connect the 18 SDGs that I'd like to reach and the enablers that I need to achieve them. So that the main challenge today is the inability to measure. So there are lots of applications on that field, and this is what came to my mind. There was also a question about tools for optimization. If I understand optimization correctly, I'm talking about how to be better. I will talk about the operation research and how to be better. So in CIB now, we are not only in CIB but in all banks of Egypt, or most of them, we spend lots of time in the because of the queues in the branches. How to optimize the services in order to reduce the time that the customer spends in your branches. This needs an optimization process. It is not about the technology, but it is about having enough data about the problem that I'm trying to tackle, and also to have the abilities to analyze the data with the right mathematical equations. So if you talk to this about to someone, they immediately tell you to do regression analysis, but regression analysis is not always the right solution in order to reach the conclusion that you'd like to reach. So the use of data sciences and the 70 data sciences. This is very important for optimization call centers, or for example, and how much time the customers spend on phones. So most of the work on optimization is based on mathematical models. There was a question by Mr. Mahmoud from the Ministry of Planning about what the government can do. I think I responded to that, but what is important, in order not to engage our minds in two aspects, the first aspect has to do with the data hoarding. And what kind of data that you need. So the data planning is very important. We have lots of I don't need any critical data elements, and then we can start hoarding or storing. Otherwise, you will have lots or too much infrastructure, and the cost will go up too much. I think the most expensive aspect here is the human element, not the technology element. We invest in those 70 items. When I delve into the details, you will realize that it is not that much expensive. You might have some data that might benefit the government, but the government doesn't have access to this data. So I'm talking about communication between the companies that have big data on the one hand and the government on the other hand. This is data that is available in a Vodafone company and or communications companies in general, but the government does not know this data. If I propose this or pitch this to the government to buy this data, the government might refuse. I'd like to tell you something. The starting point, or what is with the government, not them. The government needs to know what they want and what they target, and they can ask for that from him, and they can take that. It's not about knowing what data is available with him and trying to identify how to use them. This is the point. The government might not know what to use. If there is enough communication of that with the CIP, for example, or Vodafone or communications companies, it would be good. and the cap mass with all the information that it has. They have a lake or a sea of information that alone it is available, but you need to know what you want. So the use is important, and we said the same point when we were talking about blockchains. We need to know the uses that we want from it before we start investing in the infrastructure in order to have a sea of information without knowing what kind of information will benefit me. I think the initiative is there with the Ministry of Communications in order to take the initiative and to combine or to mobilize the different government agencies that have a huge amount of data or information, and they can benefit from people working in the private sector on that field with a vision based on having certain things that needs to be achieved, but you need to know what you need first. We'd like to create some kind of communication. We have the digital community covers that.
The speaker is talking off the mic. Well, that was an achievement. The starting point was the request. The cap mass approached them, and that's how the Ministry of Communications provided them. So the request has to be made. We were responsible for the for creating the register of the deceased and for the ill persons, and we pitched this idea here. I'd like to thank Dr. Nagua for raising the idea about the application from healthcare. Regarding investment, it's very good that the first data science started in the banks. Today we are dealing with our data lab as a business-oriented entity, and we have no uplifting factor because we finance it internally, and the ROI are beating our expectations. I cannot go on the record here. The impact is 5 or 6 folds compared to the typical investment. And our banks, we care about the privacy of the accounts, but we have the Consumer Protection Act or the Data Protection Act. I'll just give you an example. There are many organizations that work on payments and have many information, such as e-finance and Fowry. They have to be compliant with the act in protecting the confidentiality of their customers. Also, the National Payment Authority is adopting these initiatives because the whole system has to be compliant with the law. I believe that we have reached the conclusion of our session. I would like to thank Mr. Islam Zikri, the CEO of the Analysis and Data Management at the CIB, and Dr. Ala Zahir, the Strategies and Innovations at Vodafone Masr, Dr. Abla Abdul-Latif. And I would like to thank you for coming here, and we shall meet in the coming seminars. Thank you very much.